Welcome to Mind Bank Audios, where every listen makes your mind richer. You might have once thought you were a shy, introverted, or unsociable person, but what if this was just a story you keep repeating in your mind, not a fixed reality? This book doesn't treat shyness, it dissects its roots, shatters its illusions, and unveils the mask that conceals your true confidence. It's a wake-up call. You are not shy, but rather restricted by beliefs planted by fear. In this practical and straightforward guide, you will embark on a mental and behavioral journey that liberates you from the confines of shrinking back and reshapes your self-perception from within, so you can begin to appear, speak, communicate, and confront with confidence. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Shyness. The author opens this chapter with a direct challenge to the reader. Are you actually shy, or have you just gotten used to labeling yourself that way? The problem doesn't lie in shyness itself, but in your self-definition of it and the unexamined repetition of your shy identity. Shyness, as the author explains, is not a permanent trait or a congenital defect, but a learned behavior that is reinforced over time through repetition, withdrawal, and avoidance. He takes us back to the roots of shyness, questioning how it's planted in childhood when a child is punished or mocked merely for expressing themselves. This forms an internal equation: appearing equals threat, and interacting equals danger. With the repetition of this equation, the mind starts to establish a defensive pattern based on silence, isolation, and avoidance. In this chapter, the author asks the reader to stop using phrases like, "I'm shy," "I don't like speaking in front of people," or "I'm not sociable," because every repetition of these phrases is a form of negative self-programming that closes the door to change. He poses the most important question. When was the last time you tested yourself outside your comfort zone? Or have you always run away from the moment you were supposed to express or reveal yourself? The chapter ends with a powerful message. Shyness is not a part of your identity, but a forgotten habit that must be broken. Chapter 2. The Fake Identity. In this chapter, the author moves on to dismantling one of the most dangerous concepts in a person's life, the identity they adopt for themselves. He says that people don't act based on truth as much as they act based on what they believe to be the truth about themselves. He explains that every time you say, "I'm shy," you are not describing a temporary feeling, but solidifying a permanent identity that forces your mind to act in accordance with that identity, even if it's not realistic or necessary. He points out that many shy people are not actually shy. They haven't yet learned how to act with confidence because they haven't given themselves the chance to try it, or they failed just once and believe that failure was the rule. Then he presents a simple and effective exercise. Every time you are about to say, "I'm shy," replace it with the phrase, "I am a person who is learning how to be clearer and more present." This exercise, he explains, is not just playing with words, it's a reprogramming of the mental identity. Shyness, in the author's view, is the result of accumulated negative thinking, past embarrassments, and distorted personal interpretations. However, the true identity at its core is flexible and can be reshaped. The chapter concludes with a reflective question. What if you were never shy, but only believed it because you never challenged that belief? Chapter 3. Breaking the Closed Loop. The author opens this chapter with a precise analogy. Shyness is like a closed loop that spins in the human mind. It starts with the expectation of failure or embarrassment, which leads to avoiding the social situation, resulting in feelings of regret or guilt, which in turn reinforces the belief, "I'm not cut out for social situations." And so the cycle continues unbroken. The author focuses on the most critical link in this chain: avoidance. Avoidance is the fuel that keeps shyness alive because when you avoid speaking, appearing, or expressing, you prevent yourself from experiencing a new reality and keep your mind captive to the old negative image. He explains that the solution is not to stop feeling shy, but to act despite the feeling. Shyness is a natural emotion, but it only becomes a constraint when we grant it complete control over our actions. Then he presents a practical model he calls the small window of courage, which is a brief moment, no more than a few seconds, when a thought surfaces, speak now, raise your hand, initiate a greeting, say your opinion. We often kill this window with hesitation or overthinking. The author encourages the reader to seize these moments before the mind intervenes with fear and procrastination, because courage is not always in the words, but sometimes in the second of decision before fear attacks. He gives a real-life example. A person thinks about starting a conversation with a coworker. A moment of internal readiness passes, but then he thinks, what if he doesn't respond? What if it seems weird? And he withdraws. But if he moves during the window of courage, the result is not only a successful social interaction, but the breaking down of a piece of the wall of shyness. He also notes that avoidance creates a subtle type of temporary comfort, but it is a false comfort. The mind feels it has escaped the situation, but in reality, it has deepened the feeling of helplessness further and further. In closing, he sets the golden rule. Repetition breaks the loop, and every time you face a small situation you would have previously avoided, you are actually retraining your mind for freedom. Chapter 4. The identity of shyness is not you. The author begins this chapter by dissecting the deep concept that makes many people prisoners of shyness, the link between shyness and personal identity. When a person says, I'm shy, they are not describing a fleeting behavior, but proclaiming a fixed identity. This identity becomes a golden cage. It may seem comfortable to blame everything on shyness, but the painful truth is that when you define yourself by shyness, you build an internal wall that prevents you from changing. The author clarifies that shyness is not an inherent essence, but a pattern you learned and responses you trained yourself on, perhaps stemming from an environment that condemned you to silence or experiences that made you doubt your worth. The author compares two people, one who says, I'm shy, and another who says, I sometimes feel shy. The difference between them is not just words, but the awareness of the distance between the self and the behavior. The second person realizes the feeling is temporary and can be modified, while the first has fixed the feeling to their forehead, making it a permanent ID card. He then offers a practical exercise. Write the sentence, I'm shy, on a piece of paper, and then tear it up. Afterward, write, I sometimes feel shy, but I am not shyness, and repeat it out loud. This may seem simple, but the author insists that changing the language reshapes the mind. At the end of the chapter, he leaves a central message. You are not your feelings, nor your thoughts, nor your past experiences. You are perpetually capable of reshaping yourself anew. Chapter 5. Don't wait to feel ready. This chapter attacks a pervasive and deceptive idea that we only take action if we feel ready. The author calls this idea the emotional illusion. He explains that those who wait to feel confident before starting a conversation or wait for fear to disappear before participating in meetings are actually handing over control of their lives to a temporary mood. The truth the book presents is confidence does not precede the action. It follows it. You feel fear, you act, and then you discover that you weren't harmed. This is how confidence grows, step by step, not as a feeling that arrives suddenly. The author then introduces the false motivation theory. He suggests that we imagine an ideal moment when we will feel enthusiastic and do everything, but this moment rarely comes. The human mind is adept at creating convincing excuses. Not now. Tomorrow is better. After I get better. And the waiting continues until we convince ourselves that the problem is with us, not the method. He gives an example of a young man who postponed speaking in front of his colleagues for months. When he decided to start, despite his trembling hand, he discovered that half of his fears were figments of his imagination. The core idea here is, do it before you feel capable. Be a body that moves, not a mind that waits for complete reassurance. In conclusion, the author says, true readiness is not born in the heart. It is forged on the ground of reality through small, repeated actions. Chapter 6. Small habits change everything. In this chapter, the author shifts from the theoretical to the practical to assert that changing behavior doesn't happen in leaps, but through small, continuous steps. Simple habits ultimately form a new identity. The author presents the concept. Shyness is a series of small, accumulated habits such as withdrawal, silence, avoiding eye contact, and fear of the unknown. Therefore, dismantling it is not through a single decision, but through precise, counteracting habits. He gives clear examples. The daily practice of eye contact for 3 seconds, saying good morning to a new person every day, recording a daily 30-second video speaking about an idea, leaving the house without headphones, and paying attention to people. Every simple habit sends a signal to the mind, I can, I am changing, I am not who I was yesterday. He then explains the principle of hidden accumulation. The mind doesn't feel the effect of these habits on the first day, but after 2 weeks, it starts to adapt. After a month, it sees results. And after 3 months, the new behavior becomes natural. In the chapter's summary, the author boils down the idea to a clear statement. Behavior is nurtured, not imposed. And all you need to nurture your behavior is a little courage and a lot of repetition. Chapter 7. The Root of the Fear of People. This chapter focuses on the deep psychological root behind social shyness, the fear of people, or rather the fear of people's judgment. The author asks a fundamental question. Are you afraid of the interaction itself or of being judged negatively during the interaction? He answers that most shyness does not come from a lack of social skills, but from a false mental image that says, everyone is looking at me and criticizing me. The author calls this thinking pattern self-attention exaggeration. The shy person sees themselves as if they are in the spotlight, whereas the truth is that people are more preoccupied with themselves than you might imagine. He explains how childhood can plant this fear. A child who was mocked by an adult when they speak, a child who was embarrassed in front of others, or a family environment that judges quickly and criticizes a lot. All these experiences leave a message in the subconscious, people are dangerous, so be careful not to be your true self in front of them. The author offers a mental dismantling exercise. Every time you feel shy, ask yourself, who am I afraid of and why? What is the worst thing that could happen? Is it real? In conclusion, the author asserts, people don't judge you as you think. They see what you allow them to see. Chapter 8. How to Speak with Confidence Even If You Are Afraid. This chapter is entirely dedicated to the art of speaking confidently in moments when fear dominates. The author begins by correcting a fundamental understanding. Confidence is not the absence of tension, but the ability to act despite the tension. He presents a set of practical tools for speaking confidently. Slow, deep breathing before and during speech, looking people in the eyes for short seconds, using short, clear sentences and not trying to appear perfect, a slight smile to calm the nervous system and make others accept you. He then emphasizes that the most important thing a confident speaker does is that they don't run away from silence. When they feel fear, they don't fill the space with trembling words. They allow a short silence and breathe. This silence, instead of weakening them, gives them stability. He then explains the myth of instantaneous cleverness. People think that the person who speaks confidently is quick-witted, but the reality is that most good speakers rehearse their ideas, repeat them often, and know when to stop, slow down, and smile. He concludes the chapter with this important principle. You are not required to be the best, only to be present. And presence begins with one clear word, even if you feel afraid inside. Chapter 9. Building personal presence. This chapter is not just about confidence, but about presence. That aura that surrounds a person who seems comfortable, strong, and noticeable even before they speak. The author starts with a question. Why do some people feel their presence before they utter a word, while others, no matter how much they speak, are not noticed? The answer lies in presence. And presence is not magic, but the result of an internal balance between the body and the mind. The author presents 3 essential elements of presence. Physical uprightness, sitting or standing straight, sends a signal to the brain that you are in a state of readiness, not withdrawal, which directly reflects in your voice tone and eye gaze. Calmness during interaction. Those who speak too quickly or move too much are trying to compensate for anxiety. Those present with confidence, however, give themselves space for slowness and clarity. And clear intention. When you enter a social situation with the intention of being helpful or a good listener, your energy differs completely from someone whose mind is preoccupied by, will they like what I say? Will I make a mistake? The author concludes the chapter with this statement. Presence is not about imposing yourself, but about being comfortable with yourself. Chapter 10. The Art of Confronting Without Aggression. Chapter 10 addresses a painful point. Many shy people don't know how to say no or set clear boundaries because they think any refusal or objection will make them unliked or bothersome. But the author clarifies that a lack of confrontation does not mean kindness, it means a loss of self-respect. He then explains the difference between 3 communication styles. Submissiveness, where the person agrees to everything for fear of rejection. Aggression, where the person imposes their opinion crudely. And assertiveness, where the person expresses their opinion calmly and without excessive justification or shyness. The author provides a practical training phrase. I understand your point of view, but that doesn't work for me right now. A simple, assertive, and non-aggressive sentence. He says that assertiveness is not just a verbal skill. It stems from an internal sense that you deserve to be heard and respected. Then he warns against the destructive psychological habit, I say yes so they don't think I'm weak, because it makes you give up yourself for temporary approval. True assertiveness, on the other hand, is about saying what you mean, gently and without hesitation. In conclusion, the author asserts, every time you avoid speaking the truth, you are training others to ignore you. Chapter 11. How to Stop Monitoring Yourself All the Time. This chapter tackles one of the most dangerous roots of social shyness, pathological self-focus during interaction. When you are among people, instead of engaging in the conversation, you start monitoring your movements, your voice tone, your facial expressions, and even how you stand. Your mind becomes like a camera that follows you instead of what's happening in front of you. The author calls this state the internal prison, where you become your own jailer and every simple interaction turns into a test. But the truth, as he clarifies, is that most people don't notice you as much as you think. They notice your response to them. What matters to them is not whether you stutter or smile too much, but whether you see them or are preoccupied with yourself. The author suggests a practical tool called shifting the focus. Every time your mind starts monitoring yourself, say internally, look outward, not inward. Direct your attention to the person in front of you, their tone of voice, their thoughts, what they are genuinely trying to say. When you do this, the tension decreases because you are no longer the center of the event, but a participant in it. He then explains that letting go of the pursuit of perfection is the first condition for spontaneous appearance. When you accept that you don't need to be perfect, you can be real, and people love those who are real, even if they're not perfect. Chapter 12. Is shyness part of your identity? Here, the author moves on to addressing a fundamental belief that solidifies shyness. I am a shy person. This is my nature. He reveals how many people failed to differentiate between feeling shy in a situation and considering shyness a fixed part of their identity. When you say, I am shy, you close the door to change for yourself. But when you say, I experience shyness sometimes, you open the door to growth. The author discusses the difference between identity and behavior. Identity is who you believe you are, while behavior is what you do, and behavior can be changed gradually. He gives a real-life example. A person refuses an invitation to speak publicly and says, I'm not that kind of person. But the truth is, their refusal does not come from an inability, but from their fear of being judged, and it's easier for the brain to hide behind the phrase, I'm not this person, than to say, I'm afraid. The author directs the reader to a mental practice. Every time you feel shy, instead of saying, this is me, say, this is a feeling visiting me now, but it doesn't define me. This way, you begin to separate who you are from what you temporarily feel. Chapter 13. How to deal with embarrassment after social situations. This chapter is critically important because it addresses the stage after the interaction. The shy person often suffers not only during the conversation, but also by judging themselves afterward. They obsess over every word they said, magnify every moment of silence, and tell themselves, I should have said this, or what did they think? The author calls this phenomenon social rebound, a mental habit that turns human interaction into a source of prolonged anxiety. The problem here is not what happened, but how we interpret it after it's over. He explains that the fearful brain doesn't search for the truth, it searches for what confirms its fear. Therefore, even if your interaction was normal, your mind will find a small fault and magnify it to tell you, see, you're bad at communicating. The author suggests a tool called conscious review, a mental exercise to dismantle the moment. What actually happened? What did I say? Were there any actual negative reactions? And if the situation repeated, what would I do better without self-flagellation? He then clarifies a profound point. People don't remember details as much as you think. They remember the feeling you left them with, and what creates that feeling is not your exact words, but your presence and your sincere communication. The author concludes the chapter by saying, don't judge yourself as an external monitor. Be a friend to the version of you that tried to be brave. Chapter 14. Why you don't need to be funny or impressive. This chapter addresses the hidden psychological pressure felt by many who suffer from shyness, the desire to be impressive, funny, or brilliant in conversations. The author shows that fear does not only come from speaking, but from the desire to be amazing while speaking. These high expectations turn the simplest social encounter into a performance the mind dreads. Here, he offers a liberating idea. People don't need you to be funny. They need you to be sincere and present with them. In fact, pretending to be more than you are makes others uncomfortable, while when you are simply yourself, even with few words, you make the other person feel safe and accepted. The author gives a practical exercise. Next time, try to participate without the intention of impressing. Participate simply to be present, not to leave an impression. The result is that people will start to feel you more. The performance pressure will decrease, and you will become more capable of genuine interaction. Chapter 15. How to break the circle of silence in gatherings. This chapter addresses the moment of silence, where the shy person feels excluded from the scene, especially in gatherings or groups where others are speaking fluently. The author likens this moment to a vortex that starts with the feeling that you don't know what to say. Then you overthink,
and start blaming yourself, which ends up in a long silence, interpreted in your imagination as being boring or unimportant. To break this cycle, the author doesn't suggest suddenly becoming a fluent speaker, but to start with what he calls small participation, inserting a simple sentence or a small question into the ongoing conversation, even without leading the discussion. For example, "That's an important point. I was thinking about that yesterday." Or even a sincere smile and physical reaction. The key is not to wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment doesn't come to those who wait. The author encourages the reader to redefine their success. Success is not stealing the spotlight, but breaking the internal silence. Chapter 16, How to Face People Who Trigger Feelings of Inferiority. This chapter is very specific because it deals with confronting people who make you feel lesser, whether through their glances, words, or manner of speaking. The author clarifies that some people, consciously or unconsciously, have a style that makes others feel like they are being tested. This could be a boss, a highly competent colleague, or even a relative who speaks with excessive confidence. The author points out that the feeling of inferiority is not only a result of the other person's behavior, but of the messages we activate within ourselves when we face this behavior. Therefore, he provides a mental tool he calls internal rebalancing before external interaction. This means that before you interact with this person, you need to summon some truths. This person's confidence doesn't mean a lack in me. I have enough to express my opinion even if I'm not like them. I deserve the space even if I stumble. He then explains how standing firm physically, body language, looking in the eye, and using short, clear sentences are enough to bring you back to your internal center, even if the other person is provocative or critical. The bottom line here is not to silence the arrogant people, but to silence the internal voice that agrees with your feeling of lowliness.
Chapter 17, From Fear to Curiosity. In this chapter, the author shifts the perspective on social fear, showing that much of the tension in social situations does not stem from a real danger, but from an internal exaggeration of the possibilities of rejection or embarrassment. The author suggests an effective psychological tool, replacing the state of fear with a state of curiosity. Instead of asking yourself, "What if I fail or they don't like me?" ask, "What will I discover about myself in this meeting? What can I learn from the experience?" This mental shift doesn't eliminate tension immediately, but it brings you into a less threatening and more flexible mental state. Curiosity allows you to be present in the moment instead of attacking it. He then asserts that curiosity does not mean a lack of seriousness. It means opening up to the experience instead of prejudging it. Chapter 18. Don't overanalyze yourself. This chapter discusses a trap that many shy individuals fall into: excessive analysis of every small action before, during, and after any social situation. For example, did I seem stupid when I said that? Why didn't I answer faster? Did they notice I was nervous? He compares this pattern to a distorted mirror that doesn't reflect reality, but exaggerates flaws and hides spontaneity. He encourages the reader to treat these thoughts as mental noise that shouldn't be automatically believed. Instead, he suggests responding to these questions with, maybe it wasn't that bad. Or, do I have real evidence that they focused on me? He then focuses on the concept of external presence, which means shifting your attention from your inner self, how do I look, to others. What are they saying? How do I feel about them? Breaking free from overanalysis doesn't mean becoming reckless, but stopping the continuous self-flagellation after every situation. Chapter 19. Developing your supportive internal voice. In this chapter, the book transitions to building a positive, realistic internal voice as a central tool for dismantling chronic shyness. The author explains that most shy people have a harsh, critical internal voice that surfaces with every small mistake or short silence. This voice is not reality, but an echo of past experiences, perhaps from childhood or critical environments. The author calls on the reader to build an alternative internal voice, not falsely positive, but a voice like a conscious friend that says, I stumbled a bit. That's okay. It's normal. I tried, and this is great progress. I'm still on the path, and I won't go backward. This voice doesn't eliminate negative feelings, but provides a mental foundation that softens their impact. He then points out that repeating this new pattern doesn't yield immediate results, but it plants seeds that change your way of thinking over time. Chapter 20. Don't wait for fear to vanish. Move with it. This is a fundamental chapter where the author presents one of his most important ideas. Confident people are not fearless. They move despite the fear. The author rejects the common idea that you can't act until you feel ready and shows that much of the change happens through action, not through waiting. Meaning, don't wait for the terror to disappear to speak. Speak with a trembling voice if necessary. Don't wait to be 100% ready. Move with what you have now. This small step is not just the beginning of improvement, but a practical proof that you are stronger than your fears. Repeated action produces a new feeling of confidence, just like staying in a place of safety feeds doubt. The author concludes the chapter with the idea that fear doesn't mean stopping, it means you're on the verge of expansion. Chapter 21. Avoid perfection, start with the realistic. In this chapter, the author addresses one of the hidden roots of shyness, the pursuit of perfection. The shy person doesn't fear the action itself, but fears not being perfect when doing it. He explains that this mindset freezes you because you link self-worth to faultless performance. From here, the cycle begins. I won't participate until I'm fully prepared. I won't speak unless I'm sure of every word. If I don't appear smart or articulate, silence is better. This thinking seems rational, but is a subtle trap for withdrawing from life. The author suggests a simple and effective principle. Do it imperfectly, but do it. It's enough to complete the action at an acceptable level to break the inertia and begin to develop yourself. He then points out that the world doesn't wait for a perfect version of you, but for your real presence, even if it is confused or hesitant. Chapter 22. Appreciating silence, not fearing it. This chapter addresses an important angle many overlook, the fear of moments of silence during conversation. Many shy people feel terror when the conversation pauses for a few seconds, imagining that others are starting to judge them or that the situation has failed. But the author explains that this anxiety stems from a misconception that conversation must always be flowing, whereas in reality, a short silence is very natural in conversations. It's a moment of reflection or transition. The author invites the reader to a simple psychological training. When you encounter silence, don't rush to fill it with random words. Relax in its presence. Breathe and notice what you feel without panic. He then points out that confident people don't run away from silence. They radiate presence within it. Confidence doesn't mean continuous talking, but the ability to be fully present, whether speaking or not. Chapter 23. Be honest about your shyness. This is an important and bold chapter, as the author encourages the reader to stop hiding their shyness as if it were a flaw to be concealed. Instead of faking excessive confidence or hiding tension behind a mask of smiles, the author says, say it frankly. For example, excuse me, I feel a bit nervous right now. I'm trying to be more open, so I might hesitate a little. This honesty doesn't weaken your image, it shows your courage and realism. The interesting thing is that people usually empathize with honesty and appreciate your courage to express yourself truthfully. He then clarifies that admitting shyness doesn't mean clinging to it, but consciously dealing with it without being ashamed of the shyness itself. This is where freedom begins, when you stop falsifying yourself and give yourself permission to appear as you are, not as you're supposed to be. Chapter 24. Social interaction is a skill, not a talent.
In this chapter, the author dismantles one of the most prominent misconceptions that keep many prisoners of shyness, the belief that the ability to speak and interact with others is an innate talent that some people are born with and others are deprived of. But the truth, as the author clarifies, is that social interaction is a learnable skill, similar to writing or swimming. In fact, most people who are seen as naturally social have gone through many experiences and faced many situations and failed in them before mastering communication skills. The problem is that the shy person usually doesn't grant themselves the right to gradual learning. They want to be brilliant from the first attempt, and if that doesn't happen, they interpret it as a flaw in their personality. The author encourages the reader to change this view and treat every social interaction as a training opportunity, not a final test. And with every practice, even if small, self-confidence begins to build not from an abstract internal source, but from practical experience. Chapter 26, Stopping Self-Monitoring While Speaking. In this chapter, the author focuses on a tiring mental habit practiced by most shy people without awareness, monitoring the self moment by moment during conversation. The shy person doesn't live the moment. They are divided into two halves. One half speaks and the other half monitors. Does my voice sound good? Do others notice my nervousness? Was I clear? What are they thinking now? This continuous monitoring consumes energy, increases tension, and weakens performance. It also deprives the person of spontaneity and makes them a prisoner of the mental image they believe they must present. The solution, as the author suggests, is to shift the focus from the self to the other person. Instead of asking, "How do I look?" ask, "What is this person trying to say?" Instead of thinking of your perfect reply, listen deeply to what is being said. When you step out of the prison of self-monitoring and begin to engage in the conversation, tensions automatically decrease, and you become more present and authentic in your communication. Chapter 26, Building an Environment that Supports Social Courage. This part of the book concludes with an important affirmation. The environment surrounding you either supports your emergence from shyness or reinforces your staying in it. If you are surrounded by critical, mocking, or unsupportive people, it's natural for your desire to express and initiate to shrink. Conversely, if your environment is supportive, even in its silence, it gives you a safe space to experiment with yourself without fear. However, the author doesn't call for waiting for the ideal environment, but for consciously building it. Find one or more people you can be yourself with. Choose small situations where you can test interaction without judgment. Reduce time spent with people who weaken your confidence or remind you of your fears. This chapter concludes with the statement, emerging from shyness is not just an internal battle, but also an external engineering. Shape a small world that supports your growth, and you will find yourself naturally growing within it. Chapter 27, Don't Be Afraid to Appear. In this chapter, the author highlights a central idea. The shy person often fears being seen, not because they don't want to communicate, but because they fear being judged or rejected. This fear pushes them to withdraw from opportunities that require appearance, whether it's speaking in front of a group, expressing an opinion, or even publishing an idea online. But the truth the author clearly presents is that appearance is not a flaw, it's the first step to impact. Everyone you see as successful or confident has gone through moments of confusion and fear of exposure, but they went through them and did not stop there. Appearance is not a declaration of perfection, but a declaration of intent. I am here. I am trying, learning, and developing. Chapter 28. Don't wait to be ready for the shy person. The shy person often falls into the trap of waiting for the feeling of perfection before taking the step. They wait to feel confident before speaking, for their speech to be perfect before participating, for tension to completely disappear before confronting. But this waiting is what keeps them in the circle of fear because complete readiness never comes. The author presents a simple yet powerful principle. Progress comes from action, not from readiness. Every imperfect step you take brings you closer to where you want to go.
Chapter 29. Define yourself by yourself. One of the most dangerous things a shy person does is that they let past experiences or others' expectations define them. They see themselves as they were described in the past, introverted, unsociable, too quiet. But the author confirms that identity is not written in ink. It's written in pencil and is always erasable and reformable. When you start acting in a new way, even if it feels unfamiliar, you are rewriting your story and freeing yourself from the narrow image you were trapped in. Shyness is not a part of your identity, but a temporary behavior that arose due to old situations, and it's time to redefine yourself on your own terms. Chapter 30. Small Daily Courage. The final chapter doesn't call for a sudden, radical transformation, but for practicing small, daily courage. Starting a simple conversation, asking for something without fear, expressing your opinion even if your voice trembles, attending a meeting, smiling at a stranger, saying no when you mean it. These small actions are not without effect. They are the daily exercises that reprogram the brain, build new bridges between you and the world, and prove to yourself day after day that shyness is not your destiny, but a choice that can be overcome.